How much money do you actually need to buy a house in the DMV? I'm Dale Beasley, real estate agent in the DMV, over 15 years experience in the real estate industry. And we want to get into how much it actually costs to buy a house in the DMV. A lot of people think the answer is 20%. And that's the first myth. As you look at a house, it's 500K. You're like, I don't have $100,000 to buy this house. And you don't need it. There's programs as low as 3.5% you can purchase and use to buy a house in the DMV with the FHA program. So you don't need 20%. There's even programs where you can get help on the 3.5%. But one thing people miss all the time when my clients call me is they're only thinking about the down payment. They're like, hey, they told me I can buy a house with 5% down. I have that. What do I need to do next? And in reality, there's a little bit more to it than just the down payment. There's other fees. There's inspection. You want to pay for the home inspection. You have to pay for the appraisal. And there's a group of fees called closing costs. And those fees are also associated with buying a house. So you have your down payment, and then you have these closing cost fees, and then a bunch of other little things. The appraisal fee, like I say, the home inspection fee, which I highly recommend. These are all fees you need to buy a house. But let's get into it. Let's break it down so you have an idea of what it takes to buy a house. And the largest fee is true indeed, the down payment, right? So whether it's 3.5% or 5% for the down payment, that's going to be the biggest lump sum of cash. So you could take a house, you could say that a lot of homes is 500. As you know, I like the 500 to 600K range in the DMV. So, you take that house and you're looking at 3% or 3.5%. You're looking at about $17,000 or $18,000 you need to put down on that house, right? And that's a big number for a lot. And then on top of that, you can have the closing costs. So here's a good idea, right? 3% on it, and there's really 3.5%, but we'll do simple math. 3% on your 500K, it's going to be $15,000 for your down payment. Sometimes people do 5% down, that's $25,000 on a $500,000 house, right? If you do 10% or 20%, it all depends. A lot of my people doing 20%, it's because they are typically selling a house, maybe walk away with a nice piece of change. They'll take some of that money and go into the new house and put on a down payment, maybe 20%. At 20%, you can start to cut some major fees, which is one called mortgage insurance, PMI, which is an insurance that you pay. It's very weird, but you pay it in case you default, and it protects the lender. But at 20% equity, that oftentimes get dropped. Do you need 100K to buy a house like that? No. You can buy it for much less, and especially in this current time making this video on 26 in August, it's a buyer's market. So right now you can buy a house with little money. There's lots of programs. You have a lot of sellers that are very motivated, that are willing to pay these closing costs and things for you right now in the current market. So closing costs. This can typically be 1%, 2%, 3%, 5% is a little on the high side, but 2-3% is what you would consider your closing costs. All right, so if you're buying a house for 500K, you might spend $10,000 in closing costs. These are fees, recording fees to the government and things like that to move the title over, taxes, prepaid. It's an average on what you might pay, right? If you got 3% in closing costs, you'd be looking at $15,000 in closing costs, right? So you go back to your 3% on your purchase price, that's 15. Then you got another 15 for your closing costs. Right now, we're already at $30,000 to buy a house that is about 500K. The next thing we want to think about is cash reserves, right? How much money do you have for the bank, right? They want to see that you didn't buy this house and that was every nickel you had. You spent your last dime on buying this house because that's not comfortable when something happens up. So you want to have some cash reserves. Now the banks technically aren't saying, hey, we want to see 20 grand, we want to see 30 grand, but they do want to see, hey, you can cover a few months of payments. You're not going into this with $0. Cash reserves is something you also want to consider. So right now we're already at about 30K. Let's throw in another 10K of cash reserves they might want to see. So let's look at all the numbers, right? Our down payment, On the 500K, we're going to say 15K. So we're going to be really about, say, it's 3.5% down on FHA. So we're looking at about 17.5 or so on that property. Then we're looking at the closing costs, which could be 2-3%. We'd say another $15,000. So we're at $32,000, $33,000, $34,000, right? And you also want to consider having some money in the bank. So now we're at $40-something thousand. You don't necessarily have to have these things. It's not a hard rule, but some lenders look at it and they say, hey, how much money will they have after they purchase the house, right? So we say, hey, you need between $30,000 and $40,000 to buy a house that is about 500K. Right? Now, of course, if you have it, you can go up 10% down, 5% down, 20% down. We also increase these numbers, right? 20% down is already 100K. The closing costs and things like that, they're about the same, so that number doesn't change. You might spend 15, 20K there, but you may be looking at 120,000, 130,000 if you want to put 20% down on a house like this and avoid the PMI, which can greatly reduce your monthly payment. We also want to talk about currently, at this current time, how much we're looking at when it comes to interest rates. What are the payments on a house for 500K after you did that, after you've come up with the money to purchase the house? What are the payments like on that property? So we'll take the same example, $500,000 house, and we'll look at the mortgages. Currently, at recording this, the mortgage rates are about 6.7, right? So you put your 3% down, you got your down payment that's 15K, and you're gonna have a loan for about $485,000, right? Principal and interest, and this is just a part of the full payment, that's about $31.55, right? This is principal and interest. There's some other fees that goes into your monthly payment, but this is just that. You got taxes and insurance and things like that. But that's a payment of $31.55. Let's show you if you're typically moving from another house and you have a lot of cash and you want to put down more cash. If you put 20% down on that house, your loan amount will be only $400,000, and your payment goes down to about $26.02. So you see, it saves you about $500 a month in there. Another part of that savings is, though, you also could bypass the PMI, which could be another couple $100. So at first it kind of seemed like, man, I spend $100,000, I'm only going to save a couple $100 a month, but you'd save a couple $100 from the PMI as well. So that's a way. You might be $600 to $800 savings with $100K down monthly. So like I said, with these payments, you still have to account for property taxes, and that can vary by area, homeowners insurance, condo fees if they have them, HOA fees, PMI, and the maintenance costs. So these are things you want to think about as well when you look at your total payment. And somebody be like, oh, I can afford a house for $300,000 or $500,000. It's not just that $3,100 payment. You have to throw in all the other things, which might take that payment more closer to $4,200, $4,300 with your taxes and insurance and things of that nature. So there's another layer you want to consider for the DMV. You know, the DMV is DC, Maryland, and Virginia. So you want to also consider the area where you're going to buy. Buying at DC is buying it different than buying in Virginia or in Maryland, because they all have different taxes, right? Things on the back end happen differently. The amounts you pay happen differently, and they have different rates. Even on a $500,000 house, insurance can change based on the locations as well. So these are things you want to consider when looking at, hey, where do I want to buy? I want to buy a $500,000 house. Not all of them are created equal in every area of the DMV. Oftentimes, taxes are changed by county. So even within Maryland, something in PG County versus in Montgomery County, you're going to see a different monthly price tag because the counties determine the tax rates. You'll also see a difference in closing, right? Because there are different percentages. When you look at your closing costs, they're based on that city and that county, and they have transfer tax percentages, which varies from different place to place. DC is currently at 1.45% for your transfer tax rate. So if you're buying a property over $400,000. Whereas in Virginia, it's actually put off onto the seller. So things change from place to place, and these all matter. You have to get with your lender and your title company to tell you exactly what your closing costs will be based on that particular property, which will change state to state as well as county to county. Now, I know this all seems like it's a lot, but there's great programs. So you're like, I need $40,000 to buy a $500,000 house. It's just not going to happen. And listen, you don't have to worry. There's a ton of programs out there to help you. There's programs to help with your down payment assistance. In Maryland, there's a lot of programs to help with your down payment assistance. Some even go up to 3% and pretty much cover all your down payment assistance. And right now is a great time for buyers. The buyers are in control right now, and these programs are out there to help you. Secondly, the closing costs. When it's a buyer's market, the sellers themselves are more willing to pay closing costs because there's not a lot of activity in the market. So it's very possible at this current time, in this current market here in August and 26, in the DMV market, where you may be able to get a house for little of nothing. And I'll tell you exactly how you can do it. In Maryland, let's get into it. The Maryland Mortgage Program, this can provide you up to 3%, right? $6,000 or sometime up to 3% of the purchase price. That pretty much is your down payment. It can cover it in full. If you're going to FHA and at 3.5%, this thing pretty much can cover 3%, and you can layer it with other programs to cover the other 0.5%. So this is how you can buy a house in this current environment in Maryland for zero down payment. All right. The closing costs, as I stated, the sellers are often paying the closing costs. And this is how you can buy a house in Maryland with no money. All right. This person's paying the closing costs. This person's paying the down payment. All you need to bring to the table is a good credit score and income. Let's talk about DC. DC has a program called HPAP. The HPAP program is phenomenal. It will give you an insane amount of money, up to $202,000, right? No, lots of money. But the HPAP program, HPAP in DC, is your go-to if you want to own a home with little to no money out of pocket in this current environment. Like I say, these programs are typically a little challenging because everybody snatch up the money, but the market has slowed down. So there's opportunity for you to apply for the HPAP if you want to own a house in DC. Let the seller pay your closing costs, and you can be in a house in DC with little to no money out of pocket. And let's talk about Virginia. Virginia also has a Virginia housing program where you can get 2% towards your down payment. As I say, the sellers are covering closing costs. That's anywhere in the area because the market's slower. It's a buyer's market, and the seller can pay your closing assistance to be able to get into a house. So the biggest mistake I see is people looking and saying, I want to buy a $500,000 house, but I don't have $40,000. I don't have $50,000 to make it happen. And you don't need it. In this current environment, you can arguably buy a house for little to no money out of pocket, leveraging these programs and leveraging the seller paying your closing costs. So if you're looking to buy a house, this is a good time. The rates are a little elevated, but in terms of cash to get into a home, it's a great time to buy. So if you're thinking about buying in DC, Maryland, or Virginia, don't start with just looking at houses. Start with the numbers. Figure out what you can buy. Get with someone like myself or a lender to say, hey, here's my income. What can I buy? And see what payment's comfortable to you. You do not have to max out. If they say you can afford a $900,000 house, that means we'll stretch you to the very limits of your money for $900K. You don't have to buy a $900,000 house. You can still buy a $500,000, $600,000 house and be very comfortable in it financially. So the biggest mistake is people thinking you need $40,000 or $50,000 to buy this type of house, and it's just not true. So if you're looking to buy in the DC or Maryland, reach out to me or another mortgage professional, and we can get the ball rolling. Understand the numbers, and then look at the houses that work best for you with those numbers. So, what's the biggest thing stopping you from buying a house right now? Is it down payment, credit, income, interest rates, or you just don't know where to start? Leave it in the comments, and I'll help you guys through your home buying process. Appreciate you watching. It's Dell with DR Deals and the Beasley Real Estate Group. Thanks for watching. Catch me on the next video. Meet me at the beach or the bank. I'm out.